The title of this presentation is Breaking the Law When the Law Breaks Us, Toward a Womanist Ethic of Decriminalization. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak remembering. We were never meant to survive. Audre Lorde's epigraph from the Black Unicorn has become a present-day litany for criminalized Black bodies. We were never meant to survive. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise again in the dark iron cages of a depraved carceral state. When we speak, we are muted, but our physicality is amplified by false narratives of deviance and delinquency. Even when we are silent, we are considered an imminent threat because our perceived criminality precedes our humanity. So it is better to speak remembering that in the conjuring of the moral imagination of the carceral state, Black women were never meant to survive. In this presentation, I use womanist theoethical methodologies to interrogate the criminalization of Black women's survival strategies in a socially stratified system of carcerality. My primary supposition is that Black women are criminalized for merely trying to survive and secure quality of life. I argue that Black women are at times justified in exercising moral license to defy an unjust legal system that impedes human flourishing. These claims are an indictment on the structural injustices in the carceral state, and they implicate sacred spaces. Namely, faith communities are peculiarly invisible toward the criminalization of Black women. It is therefore critical for the church to interrogate its complicity and challenge an unjust legal system that makes it nearly impossible for Black women to thrive. Two framing questions for this analysis are, what role can the church play to challenge the criminalization of Black women's survival strategies? And when Black women's vitality is at stake, is it ever ethical to break the law to survive? In response, the first section of this presentation explores the terms of survival by centering the experiences of Black women. Second, I engage in the normative claims of natural law theory, civil disobedience, and social contract theory to frame a discussion on compliance and non-compliance in accordance with moral reasoning. In the final analysis, I construct a womanist ethic of decriminalization that beckons Black churches to use abolitionist strategies to advocate for Black women and dismantle the carceral state. Section 1. Kelly Williams Bolar is an Ohio mother who states she was compelled by duty to register her children in her father's school district where she lived part-time after her home was burglarized. The district hired an investigator to prove that she falsified her residency records and demanded that she pay restitution of $30,000 in back tuition. When she refused to do so, the district punished her for defrauding the system to send her daughter to a better school district. As a result, she was sentenced to 10 days in county jail, 3 years probation, and community service. In addition, Mrs. Williams Bolar was only 12 credits away from receiving her teacher's license. But now with the felony conviction, her ability to self-actualize by becoming employable was sorely at stake. One community member expressed suspicion and asked why Williams Bolar's particular case. Was she unjustly targeted as a poor Black woman? For example, in an affluent and predominantly white Californian suburb where I live, white privileged mothers casually talk openly and freely about using their grandparents' address so their children can attend school in a better district. On the one hand, white women are seemingly above the law, and on the other hand, the law is violently imposed on Black women for exercising comparable survival strategies to secure a higher quality of life for themselves and their children. Nevertheless, a judge sentenced Williams Bolar and held in court that the conviction was harsh, but in her view, there needed to be an example. This prompts the question, to what extent should a mother go to survive and provide quality of life for her children? These contrasting accounts also warrant an exploration of the terms of survival, not from the dominant gaze of hegemony, but from epistemines that center the experiences of Black people. According to Angela Davis, huge numbers of people lose jobs and prospects for future jobs because the economic base of these communities is destroyed, education and other surviving social services are profoundly affected. The process turns the men, women, and children who live in these damaged communities into perfect candidates for prison. Davis's assessment of the perfect candidates for prison is particularly relevant in the case of Kelly Williams Bollard. Sending your child to a better school district should never be considered criminal, nor should it make anyone the perfect candidate for prison. Yet society disproportionately criminalizes Black women for exercising survival strategies to overcome unjust social conditions in a discriminate legal system. Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs indicates that human survival requires meeting fundamental physiological needs such as water, food, and shelter. When these primal needs are denied or inaccessible, then people are unable to better themselves and attain other levels of the hierarchy, such as the highest tiers of self-actualization and transcendence. In parallel, social conditions that deprive basic physiological needs of survival also threaten Black women's ability to self-actualize and flourish. Womanist theologian Dolores Williams and Sisters in the Wilderness understands survival is more than a material means to meet physiological needs described by Maslow. For Williams, survival is means to secure a telos of quality of life. Using the biblical story of Hagar and the notions of surrogacy, Williams expounds on the ways in which Black women do what is necessary to survive, even if it means defying dominant social norms. Williams observes, quote, Black women have a long resistance history that includes running away from slavery and the antebellum era, end quote. She further asserts, Black mothers often defied laws and customs in order to nurture Black people with care and compassion. Sometimes they suffered severe consequences for their defiance, end quote. Williams instantiates this claim and states, quote, Harriet Tubman defied the law in order to physically and spiritually nurture hundreds of people back from bondage in the South to freedom in the North, end quote. While I am not suggesting that breaking the law to escape slavery is analogous to defying the law to send your child to a better school district, however, it does discriminate Black women's unfettered determination to prevail over and against unjust social conditions that impede human flourishing. Hence, when Black communal life is at stake, women of color have always done what is necessary to survive. Deborah Stone in Policy Paradox explains this phenomenon in her contention that there are rules in place for the good of society, but these rules are not always good for individuals in their particular circumstances to follow. Stone captures this concept in a policy paradox, using a Latin dictum which states, necessity knows no law. Stone explains, slave narratives, Holocaust, memoirs, and intimate stories of people in dire poverty all reveal this phenomenon. When survival is at stake, people will violate laws and their own deeply held moral principles. Some of the greatest conundrums in moral philosophy stem from this question. Is it ethical to lie, cheat, steal, betray a friend, or kill to ensure one's own survival? At some animal level, humans know that survival is the necessity that invalidates all rules. The notion that necessity knows no law bridges womanist survival strategies with political strategies of resistance to further explore the key question, is it ever ethical to violate the law to ensure one's own survival? In the next section, I explore this framing inquiry with the frameworks of Aquinas' natural law, King's civil disobedience, and Locke's social contract theory. Section 2. Aquinas maintained that law should aim toward the end of universal happiness for the common good with care for the community. Natural law's emphasis on universality, however, seemingly challenges my argument. To be clear, by no means am I promoting anarchy or suggesting that everyone should disobey laws as a universal norm. Instead, I am arguing that in particular cases of survival against social inequalities and an unjust legal system, defiance is, at times, morally justified. Natural law teaches us that everything which is legal is not necessarily moral. This tension is evident in the example of stealing. Aquinas states that stealing is a mortal sin. He also contends that, quote, in the case of need, all things are common property, so that there would seem to be no sin in taking another's property, for need has made it common, end quote. This suggests that one can be morally astute and still exercise agency to break the law when survival is at stake. Correspondingly, in a letter from the Birmingham jail, King references St. Thomas Aquinas' concept of natural law to defend civil disobedience. King writes, quote, to put it in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. As a result, King concludes there's no moral obligation to obey an unjust law. In the case of Williams-Bollard, King will protest the selective enforcement of the law. He would say it is unjust that Williams-Bollard was convicted for falsifying residency documents to send her child to a better school district, when privileged white moms in other districts do the same without any consequence. This is because just laws should have universal applicability to serve the common good. If laws do not, then there is no moral obligation to follow it. Accordingly, this line of reasoning troubles the very premise of America's social contract. According to the Second Treatise, Locke argues that people leave a state of nature to establish a social contract that unites individuals for the mutual preservation of life, liberty, and property. This contract, however, asserts common laws that only protect white men. According to Charles Mills in the Racial Contract, quote, the general purpose of the contract is always the differential privileging of the whites as a group with respect to the non-whites as a group, the exploitation of their bodies, land, and resources, and the denial of equal socioeconomic opportunity to them. All whites are beneficiaries of the contract, though some whites are not signatories to it, end quote. This begs the question, why would any non-white individual, particularly black women, ever agree directly or tacitly to sign, let alone be beholden to, a contract that never factored into the moral imagination of societies, formation, governance that will protect or preserve their rights and personhood? It is in redress of this question that I use Locke against Locke to invoke his right to revolution. Similar to Aquinas and King, Locke contends that against unjust laws that do not serve the common good of society, individuals have a right. Some thinkers interpret this to mean a duty to overthrow and replace a tyrannical government. This logic justified uprisings such as the American Revolution, French Revolution, Russian Revolution, and the Iranian Revolution. Locke therefore moves from natural rights to placing the power in the hands of the people. Final section toward a womanist ethic of decriminalization. Drawing from these traditions of resistance, likewise, a womanist ethic of decriminalization moves away from an unjust system to putting the power in the hands of black women who know what they need to survive and by duty do what is necessary to secure human flourishing. While black women are an integral part of communities, a womanist ethic of decriminalization is a clarion call for black churches to facilitate this charge by challenging its complicity and reclaiming its prophetic resistance using abolitionist strategies to advocate for black women and the dismantling of the carceral state. Together, black women and black churches can claim their natural right to self-preservation, their contractual right to revolution, and their womanist right to human flourishing against a government that does not serve their interests, validate their moral agency, or regard their personhood. And in so doing, we can catalyze new moral imaginations for a more just and equitable society. In accordance with the attrition model denoting 3 pillars of abolition, I offer 3 tangible policy and transformative justice recommendations the church can use to advocate for black women in carceral crises. First, the church must work unrelentingly for a moratorium on the criminalization of black women's survival strategies. Second, the church can help to decarcerate black women by donating a portion of its tithes and offering to the legal defense and bail for black women, educate congregations and communities on political strategies of resistance, such as jury nullification, and develop campaigns against plea bargains and prosecutory biases. Third, the church can excarcerate by working to create a more just society that grants equal access to resources for survival and flourishing, where poor black women like Kelly Williams-Bollard can send their children to receive a quality education without fear of retribution. In closing, I revisit the two-part research question that begins this analysis. Is it ever ethical to break the law? Absolutely. In the case of Kelly Williams Bollard, I have shown the ways in which Black women defy unjust social conditions that make them perfect candidates from prison by exercising moral license to survive when necessity knows no law. Secondly, what ways should the church center the experiences of Black women to end the criminalization of survival strategies? I have argued that the church must challenge its complicity and increase its political power by engaging abolitionist strategies to transform both sanctuary and society so that Black women can self-actualize, thrive, and flourish. Until the womanist ethic of decriminalization is fully realized, we must ground our resistance in the truth-telling of Audre Lorde, remembering that though we were never meant to survive, Black women are destined to be free.